everyone, it's Presley at ActOutGames.com here, and today I'm going to be looking up the stuff that Daddy told me to look up. So it's inertia, I believe it's a friction, solid, differences between solid and liquid, and how to interview things. So I'll be looking at. So I already looked up inertia, and I am using Wikipedia. Let me write that down. Wikipedia. Inertia is a resistance to any physical object, any changes, including a change. In other words, that's inertia. I'll be back later today for the next thing, which is friction. So I'm back for friction now. So I'm going to be writing about that. I'm going to be writing about that now. So I learned that fluid layers can also use friction, and I had no idea anything but solid surfaces could use friction. So I had no idea about any of that. Fluid friction. I'll be reading fluid friction. So we are now back, concluding this experiment. Yay.
So, Presley had some homework to do today. We showed you the egg spins yesterday. Presley got a chance to look at it and think about it today and do a little bit of research on inertia.
Just look at 3 Wikipedia pages.
Friction and solids and liquids and how they differ, especially with the relation to friction and inertia, right?
Okay.
So why don't you tell us what you learned about inertia today?
Inertia. Okay. Inertia. Mind. Okay, there. Inertia is the resistance of any physical object to any change in its motion. In other words, it is the tendency of objects to keep moving in a straight line at linear velocity. Or, Newton's first law of physics, something that's in motion tends to stay at motion, and something that's not in motion tends to stay not in motion.
Mm-hmm. What does that mean to you? Anything? Is that as good as you can explain anything?
That's pretty good.
Any examples?
Mm-hmm. Like, we have our X still.
Mm-hmm.
If you spin this egg, it wants to keep spinning. It'll keep. So if you spin the hard-boiled one, the hard-boiled one, science is waiting to happen right now. If you spin the hard-boiled one, it tends to stay spinning.
Right. Well, and it'll spin unless
you stop it.
Unless something stops it, right?
Unless something stops.
And if it's sitting still, what will it do?
It'll just stay sitting still. Unless you spin it again.
Unless you do something acts on it.
Or somebody else does it.
Yeah, gravity could do it, or lots of things could do it.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about the second principle, friction.
Friction is the force resisting the relative motion of solid surfaces, fluid layers, and material elements, sliding against each other. There are several types of friction.
Okay. What does that mean?
So a basic example of friction is like when you rub your hands together, they become warm. That is friction.
Mm-hmm.
And if you rub 2 rocks together to start a fire, that's friction.
Mm-hmm. They make heat sometimes.
Yeah.
When there's friction. Yeah.
They make heat sometimes.
What else does friction do?
Friction can slow down things. So if you're like falling on the couch and accidentally push it, friction, it'll get harder for that thing to go. So friction will stop it.
Right. Mm-hmm. Or like if you push like a toy car along, we just said that inertia makes it want to just keep going forever. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't keep going forever. Mm-hmm. Why not?
Because it'll friction along the floor, and it's not a word. Friction along the floor. Friction is now a verb.
Friction's a verb. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Gotcha.
And it goes along the floor, and then friction make it harder to go along the floor and stuff. And gravity keeps it against the floor.
So gravity is what's pushing it against the floor to make friction.
So it's keeping it against the floor, and then the friction makes it harder to go.
Yeah, so I think you're right about it's a good example, putting your hands together and rubbing your hands together, right? If you just barely kind of hold them together, they move together pretty well. If you push them hard, it's harder to slide them against each other. So the more, there's lots of things that affect friction, right? But so you can see by that example, one of the things is how hard the things are pushed together, right? Because if your hands are kind of light together, they move pretty good. If they're pushed hard, it's kind of hard. Another thing, what's another thing that would affect friction, like how hard it is to slide things against each other, how easy it is to slide things against each other?
Sure. Solids.
Well, wait, what's another, in general, what's another thing that you think affects friction and how hard it is to slide things across each other?
How strong?
Yeah, how hard they're pushed together is definitely one of them. What else can you think of? That might
How hard
affect
you
it?
push it.
Yeah, how hard you push it
And
so it can move.
and how much friction the surface has. So if it's like ice, it'll
Very
go farther. If
Yeah.
it's like rubber, it'll go like that.
Like sandpaper would be kind of hard. Yeah, so how rough the surfaces are. So they stick together really good and interlock really good, or do they slide? Are they really smooth and slide like two pieces of glass? We kind of slide. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Okay, so what did you learn about solids and liquids with relation to friction and inertia? What do you know about them now that when you think about how solids deal with inertia and how liquids deal with inertia and friction, what do you think?
So how solids deal with friction is they're rubbed up against each other.
What do you mean against each other?
Well, they like to be pushed together and then rubbed like this.
Like two different solids
Yeah,
can?
Not two different solids.
Mm-hmm.
Well, two different bodies of solid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
Okay.
it doesn't have to specifically be two different solids.
Oh yeah, sure.
So it doesn't have to be like a camera and a
Okay.
tripod. It doesn't have to be a camera.
But still, that's two different eggs.
Two different eggs.
Yeah, they're the same thing, but there's still two of them.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So solids, you can rub them up against each other, and they rub against each other. And okay. What about liquids?
Liquids. When liquids happen, I don't really want to do my science, but should I go on to the whole thing?
No, let's talk a little bit about liquids.
Okay.
What liquids do. Don't jump ahead.
I really want to talk about it.
So how do liquids respond to inertia and friction, do you think?
Well, liquids, they're more spread out than solids.
The molecules?
Yeah, so you can like push one molecule away and one stays. When in solid, you push one molecule away and they all go away.
Yeah, that's good, right? So that's I think an important thing to get to is that we talk about friction as being two sort of big things like your hands that you can rub together, or the eggs, or pieces of ice, or something. But you can also think about it like molecules, right? So the same rules kind of apply. That the more things are pushed together and the rougher their surfaces are, the harder it is to slide them across each other. So
like, we'll test the paper into glass. Like this glass, the paper doesn't go that far.
Right. So the molecules in a solid, what do you know about the molecules in a solid versus the molecules in a liquid?
Molecules in a solid are all stuck together.
Closer together, right? And so
molecules in liquid are flowing around.
what did we just say that means about the friction between those molecules? If they're closer together?
They'll go, if you move one, they'll move together. So the friction is a bit stronger.
Yeah, there's more friction when they're pushed together, right? So when you move this one, the other one kind of moves along with it, right?
Right.
In liquids, they're just kind of barely touching, or some cases they're not even touching, right?
Mm-hmm.
The molecules are loose, and so what does that mean?
If you move, it has really less.
Less friction. So you can move this one without moving the other one, or maybe it moves just a little bit when this big one moves.
It moves a lot.
Right? Okay. So those are the three big science concepts that you were looking at today. You did a really good job. It was like you looked them up and kind of got to understand them. Because you didn't know anything about inertia. I even watched a couple of the videos that you shot today, and you even mispronounced it. What did you call it?
I called it inertia.
Inertia. So you learned about inertia. And so this is another thing. So this is actually a really good point.
I support it. You said inertia.
This is a really good point. This goes back to our homeschool philosophy stuff that we talked about. I said that concepts are more important than details, right? So why do you think we have a word for inertia instead of just describing what it is and saying an object at rest tends to stay at rest and an object in motion tends to stay in motion?
Because then the sentence would be way too long.
It's shorter.
It's shorter.
That's right. What else? What's another good reason that we would have a sciencey word for something like that?
So if you're talking about it, then you don't have to go you don't have to go explain what it is every single time.
So we can
so
communicate.
You can just say inertia.
You can
so
communicate
it's easier
with
to
other
communicate.
people. That's exactly right. You can have a conversation when you're talking to somebody else. But
so you don't have to be like having a conversation, and then I can be like, so I'm going to be talking about this. About eggs today, and then I have to explain
right.
eggs today, and if there wasn't a word for eggs, those liquidy things that can be boiled.
That's right. So the point though that I'm trying to get at here is that you spending the day today doing this research and calling it inertia, you weren't learning wrong concepts. Like what you were learning about objects at rest and in motion and moving and stopping and friction slowing things down, it doesn't matter that you called it inertia.
Yeah,
right?
It doesn't even matter.
So like the concept is this whole idea of being at rest and staying at rest unless acted upon by an outside force. That's the concept. And you understood that and you learned that, right? And the detail was that that's called inertia. And you called it the wrong thing, and that's not a big deal to me, especially right now. I mean, over time, you've got to get the right words, because whenever you talk to somebody, you want them to know what it is that you're talking about. You want communication to be easy. But when you're getting it right in your head, and you're understanding what's happening, and your understanding of the concept of inertia, all that matters is that you understand kind of what's happening, and you can reason about it, and you can think about it. Like the details of the words and the labels and stuff like that are pretty insignificant to me right now. So it doesn't. I'm not upset that you call it inertia today, right? It doesn't matter.
So
what matters is.
So like if you're studying a toy, and you forgot one single number on its tag, that's not a big deal.
That's right.
It's not a big deal at all.
The concepts are what matters. And so this is when we talk in our homeschool stuff about concept versus detail. That's precisely what I'm talking about. So I think it's fine. Okay, so now let's talk. Let's review our experiment real quick. Here, let's go ahead and spin the eggs for you one more time. Since for anybody who didn't watch the video yesterday, you want to do one? Here, I'll do them real quik. All right, so let's do. I don't even know which one's which right now. Okay, so
that's a hard boiled.
There's the hard boiled egg. So set back away. If I spin it and I stop it and let it go, it stays stopped. The not boiled egg, if I spin it and stop it and let go, it starts spinning again. Right? So that was the whole. That's what we started with. We saw this weird thing happening, and then we wanted to find out why. So I gave Presley a couple of pointers of some concepts to take a look at, and she spent part of the day on the computer looking. You hopefully just watched some video of her doing that. And now we talked about the concepts and what you learned about the concepts, and now let's see if you can apply those concepts that you learned to explain to me why that happens. What do you think?
Science needs to happen.
What do you think? Because of science?
Because of science.
Right.
I will do this.
Okay, what happened?
So, what happened? So, this, I don't know which one this is.
Spin it.
This is the not hard-boiled one. This one's hard-boiled. Yeah, that one's
No, that's one.
One boiled. Okay. This one's boiled. So this one's boiled. It's solid on the inside. This one's not boiled. It's not solid on the inside.
What is it on the inside if it's not solid?
Liquid.
Okay.
You can kind of tell, but you Okay. So, this one, you spin it, and it goes fast, because if you spin the shell, it's attached to the rest. It all spins.
What do you mean?
So it's
solid. Use the friction that we talked about.
Friction. So the solids are all packed up together, so they have more friction. So when the shell starts spinning, the inside starts spinning because the inside has more friction than the shell is.
Yeah, so it all spins together because it's not sliding past each other, right?
And this one, which is not like that, when you spin it, it spins really slow and messy. When you stop it, it starts spinning again. That's because when you spin the shell, it starts spinning one layer of liquid and the other and the other and the other.
So explain that. Use the.
It has less friction.
It has less friction?
So it takes a little while, so it'll friction on, it says it again now, verb. It will friction onto one layer of liquid and then the
So
other.
why doesn't the liquid inside that egg start spinning immediately when you spin the shell?
Because there's less friction on it, and
why does it even take friction to get it spinning?
Because if this shell is spinning in the shell, and then it will use friction on the inside, and it'll start it spinning.
Let's use the other concept that you learned about today a little bit, and tell me why when you spin the outside, why does the inside not spin?
Because you acted on the outside, and you haven't acted on the inside.
And what does the inside want to do?
It wants to stay still.
Why does it want to stay still?
Because it has not been. Because it hadn't been put in motion yet.
And what's that
called?
called?
The shell had been. It was a lot of physics or inertia.
Inertia. It has inertia to try and stay still. So the hard-boiled egg, when I spin it, why does the inside of it spin?
Because the inside has more friction, and it's all packed together. So the inside of it is more attached to the shell acts on it easier.
So does the inside of this egg want to stop, not spin too? Does it want to stay still?
It starts by wanting to stay still.
Yeah.
But see how it's all packed up together?
But it can't.
But it can't.
Because?
Friction.
Friction. Right. Okay. Now, so we've got them both spinning. We understand when we spin this egg, everything spins together because it's all attached and it's all frictiony together, right? That egg, when you spin the outside, the inside wants to stay still, and it can because it's a liquid and everything's sliding past each other. But there's a little bit of friction that builds up. So the shell
eventually spins
a little bit of liquid, and then that liquid spins a little bit of liquid, and there's, like I said, our friend Bernoulli is getting involved in there a little bit, but that's not important right now. So there's other forces at work, but let's talk about friction. So it spins the outside of the liquid, and then that spins a little bit more liquid, and that spins a little bit more liquid, and pretty soon the whole thing's spinning, right? So we end up, when we spin both eggs, I know, hold on a second. When we spin both of the eggs, we end up eventually with everything spinning. Like this one, everything is spinning inside from the get-go because it's all frictiony together. That one takes a little bit longer, but eventually the liquid and the shell are spinning. So they're both all spinning. So now what happens when we stop them?
Well, when you stop this one, it stops the shell, which stops the rest.
Why does it stop the rest?
Because of friction yet again.
Right.
So it stops, but then with this one...
And then what happens? Once I stop this one, the shell stops and the inside stops because it's solid. So when I take my hand off of it, what happens?
It stays.
Why does it stay?
Because it has been put out of motion, and it tends to stay out of motion.
And why is that? Why is it called?
Inertia, or Newton's first law of physics.
Inertia, that's right. Okay, next egg.
So when this egg spins, and you stop it, it starts spinning again. That's because if you stop the shell, then you only stop the shell, and then all the inside is still spinning. So the inside will use friction on the shell to make the shell spin again. Like if you stop to make the shell spin again, well, the inside still spinning.
So if you hold the shell for a little bit longer, what happens?
The shell stops, and then the inside should be still spinning. But you stop the shell, and it can't. And yet again, using friction, the shell stopped for good. So it So it goes to consuming the shell, and it gets harder and harder. So eventually it stops.
Stops a little bit of liquid, stops a little bit of liquid, stops a little bit of liquid. Right. But if you just stop it for a split second, the whole inside is still spinning because of. Because. What's the word that is the reason that the inside is still spinning? Inertia. Inertia. So when you stop the shell, the inside's inertia still keeps it spinning, right? But it's rubbing up against the inside of the shell, creating friction. And so if you let go of the shell,
with all these crazy words.
you're behaving like a scientist. If you let go of the shell, that inside is still spinning because of its inertia, and it's still creating friction against the shell. That friction acts on the shell
to start it
moving, to overcome its
inertia.
It overcomes its inertia to stay still and starts it spinning again. So that is why a hard-boiled egg, if you stop it and let go, will stay. A not boiled egg, if you stop it and let go, it'll start spinning again.
Yeah.
Does that sound right? Presley, you did an excellent job.
Thanks.
That was excellent research. Your explanation was really good. You wrote down some definitions. You prepared for the video. I'm very proud of you.
Thanks.
You did a good job.
Thanks.
Anything else that you want to say?
No.
Okay.
But now this is helpful to see if you... Now this video has become helpful to see if you underboiled your eggs.
It's true. If there's liquid in the eggs, that's probably true. If you're soft boiled and there's some liquid there, we can do it. Yeah. You want to eat the hard boiled eggs now?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I already ate mine.
All right. Bye.
Bye.